I rarely watch more than a few anime each season, and I rarely watch more than 1 or 2 episodes of any of them. My focus is on the endless backlog of the shows that I know I'm going to enjoy, rather than taking a chance on stuff that really isn't to my tastes a lot of the time. I wasn't expecting much from Berserk of Gluttony when I found it on the seasonal chart. A thumbnail with a sword-wielding, black coat-wearing protagonist with a bunch of women standing behind him is almost always an indicator of a fan service-heavy show that prioritizes being a cool power fantasy over good writing or interesting presentation. Surprisingly, though, this show surpassed my expectations, low as they were. It's by no means great, and it has its issues, but I think it's a somewhat positive example of this kind of show. You know what kind of show I'm referring to if you've ever seen Sword Art Online, Overlord, Asterisk War, Chivalry of a Failed Knight, Goblin Slayer, or any of a dozen other recent shows. It's a trashy fantasy show with a setting that features a common JRPG tropes and game mechanics, centered on a protagonist who is both mild-mannered and a complete badass edgelord. That's the first major problem a lot of people will notice. There aren't a lot of original ideas in this show. The setting is almost the same as every other fantasy anime for the past 10 years, and there are a lot of issues it has in common with other light novel adaptations. However, there's a clear core which lies at the heart of this show. The conflict between the main character's curse, which grants him great power at the cost of one day driving him mad, and his romance with Lady Roxy. This core thrust and the commitment to it allow Berserk of Gluttony to stand head and shoulders above many of its peers in spite of its many flaws. A lot of these light novel adaptations lack a strong through line. Sword Art Online's first arc forgets that it's about a death game 2 episodes in, and instead focuses on the romance and harem aspects until a few episodes from the end. Overlord is even worse in this regard, as it quickly falls into a repetitive, predictable cycle of a group of characters being introduced and eventually conquered by the main characters in a slightly more evil way than last time. Berserk of Gluttony, on the other hand, is always focused on the main character, Fate Graphite, and his curse, the Gluttony skill, which gives him the power to eat souls and absorb the abilities of those he kills, at the cost of an insatiable hunger for those souls. He attempts to keep the skill a secret from his main love interest, Roxy, while feeding his curse the souls of monsters to keep it from driving him mad with hunger. This show, thankfully, does not tread into harem territory. None of the other female characters are even remotely romantically interested in Fate, at least at this point. There's mercifully little fan service as well, with nearly all of it being relegated to secondary female characters. I have to wonder if they did this intentionally, to highlight Roxy's moral purity as a contrast to the dark path which Fate must walk. Although maybe I'm overthinking this. The main draw of the show for me is the fact that it knows what it is. It isn't overly ambitious or pretentious, it just focuses on developing the simple main concepts of the story and keeping them fairly engaging. I could actually buy the power fantasy of the protagonist being a genuine and nice guy but also a badass edgy swordsman, because the writers bring attention to the contrast and highlight the conflict between the two sides. The power fantasy is topped with a layer of tension and danger, as while Fate is absolutely overpowered, there's a balance to it that doesn't trivialize the fights like in a lot of other shows like this. The more his power grows, the closer he gets to losing his mind to his insatiable hunger for more souls, and the wedge between him and his love interest grows every time. This is played into a fair amount by pitting him against increasingly powerful opponents, each of which risks sending him over the edge when he has to kill them. The tension doesn't come from whether Fate will lose any given battle. It comes from whether Fate can handle the consequences of winning. The show develops genuine engagement instead of insulting the viewer's intelligence, and I appreciate that. Although I enjoyed Berserk of Gluttony, there are some fairly glaring issues. First, while it commits to its contrast of romance and edgy action, I don't think it explores either in enough depth for it to be truly special. The romance is mostly teased, with Fate and Roxy never really going beyond very close friends, and their relationship doesn't have nearly the level of development that a show so focused on it should have. The edginess, while it adds a lot of spice to the show, is also somewhat surface level, Fate rarely does anything morally reprehensible, he never gets pushed past the edge, he never has to atone for anything he's done. If they wanted to lean into Fate's relationship being torn apart by his curse, they could have put him in scenarios where he had to kill innocent people, lost control, or at least came close to doing something with lasting consequences that he regretted later. He never has to do anything that could potentially put his relationship at risk in the end. There's just the possibility that one day he might. I understand that the gluttony skill itself is supposed to be against the laws of the gods, thanks to the fact it allows the user to bypass leveling up. But it could have been better if it had just been banned because of the immense danger to both the user and others, rather than a fairly stupid explanation. As it stands, most of what Fate kills are monsters who threaten people, and he spends most of his time protecting innocents and killing powerful monsters that threaten towns. Throughout the course of the series, he kills a total of 4 people, and only one of them is a downright edgy moment where he indulges in needless violence. There is one time where he is reluctant to kill someone, where he feels sorrow for having to condemn the victim's soul to being trapped within him, but I digress. Another tonal issue is the fan service and comedy moments. They can be annoying, although they don't drag on too long. And the use of chibi in a lot of that's heavily overused in shonen and slice of life anime is thankfully not a problem here. There wasn't much fan service or comedy outside of the episodes where Mine joins Fate's party, but the fan service is pretty tasteless and unnecessary when it happens. The other character whom I found annoying is Fate's sword, Greed, who makes a pact with him early on to sap his strength in return for massive power. This serves to add more tension to the power fantasy, as Fate is dependent upon a weapon that saps his strength. However, one thing about Greed bugged me, and that's his constant quips and jokes. I get that he's supposed to be arrogant, to the point of referring to himself with a cartoonishly arrogant pronoun, but it takes away from a lot of the fights to have a character chattering over the tense action. I also groaned every time he made a remark which only Fate could hear, and Fate told him to shut up in earshot of others, leading to a classic misunderstanding joke. This single thing happens so much over the series, and it's the main reason I came to dislike the sword as much as I did. Greed guides Fate as well, telling him exactly how a lot of mechanics work and walking him through a lot of fights. This takes away some of his agency, as he often doesn't have to use his own skill to win fights, but just directs his massive power however his sword tells him to. With regard to visuals, this show is nothing special. It looks very cheap, but that sort of thing works in its favor a lot of the time. I was pleasantly surprised that it doesn't use much CG, so it doesn't have the abysmal lows, visually speaking, of something like the Evangelion rebuilds or Attack on Titan Season 4. But it also doesn't have anywhere near the level of care put into the details, direction, or action that those productions were afforded. Low-budget productions can often be saved by unique direction and clever use of resources, but that is not the case here. The presentation is very standard and looks similar to a lot of other shows in this vein. I was glad, however, that the studio didn't shy away from showing violence and blood. While it's nothing that intense, it goes a long way towards selling me on the action that the show is shooting for. There are a few striking visuals of Fate as he struggles with his cursed skill, but that's about it. Finally, do I recommend this show? To be honest, if you're looking for quality writing and craftsmanship, I don't think you're gonna find much to like in this show. You can find far better edgy anime, as there are shows that explore far darker themes with much more complexity, or have better overall production design and impressive visuals. If you're sick of overused light novel tropes, you're going to be rolling your eyes multiple times per episode. There are better fantasy series out there, in fact, there's one airing right now that's pretty good. There are better power fantasy characters in anime. But if you liked Shield Hero, if you liked Overlord, SAO, other light novel fantasy adaptations, or if you just want some unchallenging dumb fun without a lot of the issues that are plaguing anime right now, I'd say you could do far worse. If I had to give Berserk of Gluttony a numerical rating out of 10, I'd give it a 4. It delivers enough on its core premise to be a fun time if you're willing to forgive its issues, But those issues, its lack of depth and its low production value, hold it back from being a high recommendation, or something I'll go back to re-watch anytime soon.